I never wanted much out of life, just peace, quiet, and a little place to call my own. That place ended up being a small cabin tucked away in the mountains of northern Colorado. Not a fancy log mansion or one of those curated Pinterest-ready retreats, just a sturdy weathered wood structure I bought with the last chunk of money I had after selling my late uncle's old truck and quitting a job I hated. The cabin needed work, but I didn't care. I just wanted space from people, space from noise, space from the HOA neighborhood I grew up in, where everyone peered through curtains and filed complaints over lawn height or parking too close to a mailbox. I knew when I left all that behind I was done for good. Or at least I thought I was. The truth is, it only took one person to bring that whole nightmare back, and her name was Karen. She wasn't supposed to follow me up here. She wasn't even supposed to know where I was. But somehow this woman not only found my cabin, she decided to help herself to it. And when I came back after a few weeks away, she called the cops on me, saying I was the intruder. But we'll get to that. Let me start where this mess really began. It was late spring, maybe the first real warm day of the season, and I had just gotten back from visiting my mom downstate. I had left the cabin locked up tight, no signs of forced entry when I returned, but something felt off. It was the silence. It wasn't quiet like normal mountain quiet. It was still too quiet. Like the kind of quiet when someone is holding their breath hoping you don't notice them. I stepped onto the porch and immediately noticed the rocking chair was moved to the left side instead of the right where I always left it. The doormat was flipped like someone had picked it up and put it back wrong. That might seem small, but when you live alone in the woods you notice every little thing. And I noticed that. I pulled out my keys and unlocked the front door. As soon as I opened it, the smell hit me. Not bad, just different. Someone had been cooking inside. Someone who wasn't me. I pushed open the door and stepped into the living room. My couch cushions were rearranged. A coffee mug I didn't recognize sat on the edge of the fireplace. There were shoes by the door. Women's shoes. Small. Designer brand. Totally out of place in my beat-up no-frills mountain cabin. I don't remember dropping my bag. I just remember walking toward the bedroom with this weird tight feeling in my chest. The door was slightly open. I nudged it and peeked in. And there she was, sleeping in my bed. A woman I had never seen in my life. Wearing one of my t-shirts. Snoring like she owned the place. My first instinct was to back out. I thought maybe I had the wrong house. Even though that made no sense. Then I saw my boots in the corner right where I left them. And the broken lamp I hadn't fixed yet still leaning against the wall. This was my home. And a total stranger was living in it. I cleared my throat. She stirred and blinked at me like I was the one trespassing. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and said, "Why?" Like we were roommates. I asked her who she was and what she was doing in my house. She looked at me confused, then defensive. She said, "Karen told me it was fine." I frowned. "Karen who?" She climbed out of bed and stretched. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Hey Karen," she said. "My friend from the Ridgewood community. She said you were gone and this place was sitting empty and it'd be a shame to let it go to waste." I was speechless. The audacity. "Karen. Hey Karen." The same woman who once fined my mom for putting up a bird feeder that didn't match neighborhood standards. The same woman who gave me grief every time I parked slightly over the sidewalk line when I still lived back home. She had somehow found out where I lived and told her friend it was hers to borrow. I told the woman to leave. She laughed. Then she pulled out her phone and called someone. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I heard the words. "He just showed up. He's scaring me. Yes, I think we need the police." That was when I realized what was happening. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup. Karen had planned this. And she was playing dirty. 15 minutes later, 2 deputies showed up. One was young and clearly uncomfortable. The other was older and all business. They pulled me aside and asked for ID, which I gave them along with proof of ownership of the cabin. I showed them the bill of sale, the utility bills with my name on them, my driver's license with the address. Meanwhile, the woman inside was crying, saying I had barged in and scared her. They asked how she got in. She claimed I had given Karen permission weeks ago to let her stay, which was a lie. But unless I pressed charges for trespassing or breaking and entering, which would require proof she forced entry, they couldn't remove her on the spot. Especially not with Karen backing her up. So they said, "You might need to take this through civil court." Civil court? To get a stranger out of my home. I was livid, but I held it together. I asked to speak to the woman one-on-one without yelling, without accusations, just a calm request for her to leave. She refused. Said she had nowhere to go. Said Karen promised she could stay until August. August was May. 3 whole months. This woman thought she had a summer lease in my home. I had half a mind to start tossing her stuff out onto the lawn. But the deputies warned me not to escalate. So I left. But I didn't go far. I parked just down the road and waited. I needed to think. I needed to figure out how Karen had found my place. I never posted photos online, never shared the address publicly. But I remembered something. A few months ago I had run into her at a hardware store in town. She had been weirdly friendly, asking what brought me there. I had been vague, but maybe too vague. I said I was fixing up a cabin up north. She must have followed me that day. Or maybe used her connections to look up property sales in the county. Either way, she found me. And she gave my sanctuary away like it was an Airbnb. That night I couldn't sleep. I was so angry I could barely think straight. I kept replaying her smug face in my head, the way she had always acted like she was better than everyone. And now she had crossed a line. She had broken into my life again. This time I was going to fight back. And I wasn't just going to get my cabin back. I was going to make sure Karen never messed with me again. Not up here. Not anywhere. Because what she didn't know was, I had a few tricks of my own. And the next move was mine. The next morning I was up before the sun. Sitting in my truck parked at the edge of the woods where I could just barely see the roof of my cabin through the trees. I had slept maybe 2 hours, and even that was broken and full of angry dreams. I wanted to march right back in there and drag that woman out by the ankles. But I knew better. If I touched her or her stuff, I'd be the one in handcuffs. That's how these things go, especially when people like Karen know how to play the system. And she had clearly taught her friend how to do the same. I needed to be smart. So I started thinking like Karen. What would she do if someone invaded her perfect little world? She would dig. She would investigate. She would gather every scrap of evidence and use it to make someone's life miserable. So I decided to do the same. Step 1. Find out who the woman was. Because as it turned out, I still didn't know her name. The cops had called her Miss Harper when they spoke to her, so that was all I had to go on. Harper. It wasn't much, but I had a plan. I drove into town to the little public library that had decent Wi-Fi and a few old computers with internet access. The librarian was an older guy named Dave who had lived in the area his whole life and didn't ask too many questions. I asked if they had any recent local public records or a place to check real estate disputes. He pointed me to a terminal and left me alone. After a couple hours of clicking through county documents and social media, I found her. Lindsay Harper. Originally from Texas but had moved up to Colorado last year after a messy divorce. Her Facebook profile was public. Big mistake. She had posted just 3 weeks ago a picture of my cabin with the caption, "Summer escape thanks to my girl Karen." That post made my blood boil. There were other photos too. Her sunbathing on my porch, sipping wine in my rocking chair. Walking my trails with a smug smile like she owned the land. Even a picture of my bedroom with her luggage on my dresser. I screenshot everything. Every photo, every comment, every tag. Now I had proof. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was premeditated. Karen had offered her my place and Lindsay had accepted without ever speaking to me. But I still needed more. I wanted to know how Karen pulled this off. Because if she had gotten access to my home, there had to be a key involved. I had only ever made 2 copies. One was on my keychain, the other hidden under a loose rock by the woodshed. I drove back to the cabin and checked. The rock had been moved. The key was gone. Karen must have known. She must have watched me that day at the hardware store and waited until I left town. She probably came here herself, opened the place up and let Lindsay in. Then told her to play victim when I came back. It all lined up. But knowing it and proving it were 2 different things. And if I was going to fight this, I needed more than screenshots. So I went back to town. This time to the county clerk's office. I asked if anyone had filed for a change of occupancy or temporary residence at my address. They looked confused. "No sir, only your name is listed as the legal occupant." Perfect. I asked if I could get that in writing. The clerk printed the file and stamped it. Another piece of ammo. After that I stopped at the sheriff's office and asked to speak to the deputy who had responded to the call at my cabin. It took some waiting, but finally I sat down with Deputy Carlson, the younger one from the other day. He looked tired but not unfriendly. I explained everything again and showed him the photos. He scrolled through them quietly, then sighed. "She told us you gave permission through Karen." I told him I had not. I asked if they could at least issue a formal warning or help me file for removal. He said, "It's complicated." But then he leaned in and lowered his voice. "Off the record, you might want to talk to Karen directly." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked around and said, "Let's just say you're not the first person she's done this to." My eyebrows shot up. He continued, "She's not technically breaking the law, but she's been known to manipulate certain situations. Claiming abandoned property, claiming squatters' rights, exaggerating threats. It always skirts the edge." I thanked him and left. And that was it. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about my cabin. Karen had a pattern. And if I could prove it, I could take her down. Not just for what she did to me, but for what she had done to others. So I went looking. I made a post on a local Facebook group for our mountain community. Just a vague question. Anyone else have issues with someone named Karen involving property or unauthorized guests? The post blew up within hours. Comment after comment. Stories about a woman from the HOA back in Ridgewood, who always acted like she ran the town. She had once tried to fine a guy for hanging wind chimes too loud. She had sent someone's dog to a shelter because it barked past quiet hours. One woman said Karen had once let her niece stay in a neighbor's empty vacation home while they were away. Sound familiar? I messaged that woman privately. She confirmed it was the same Karen. I asked if she'd be willing to talk. She said yes. We met that afternoon at a small diner off the highway. Her name was Denise. She was blunt and furious even after all these years. Karen let her niece stay in a house that belonged to a seasonal neighbor who only came up in winter. When the owner came back, the niece refused to leave. Same story. Cops couldn't do much. Civil court. Denise said the guy eventually sold the cabin and never came back. I asked if she had any proof. She still had emails, texts, even a voicemail where Karen admitted it was just temporary and begged her not to mention it. We exchanged info and she agreed to send it all. I was building a case, one piece at a time. And Karen had no idea. That night I returned to the woods again and stared at the lights glowing from inside my cabin. I saw Lindsay pacing in the living room, phone in hand. She looked nervous. Good. Let her feel what I felt. Let her worry. Because the next day, I was filing in court. And I wasn't just going to get her out. I was going to bring Karen in with her. And this time, I had the upper hand. The day I walked into the courthouse, I wasn't nervous. I was beyond that. I was locked and focused, ready to fight for my home. I had never sued anyone before, but there's a strange kind of energy you get when someone steals what's yours and then acts like you're the criminal. That was exactly what Karen and Lindsay had done. But not anymore. I had my paperwork. I had my evidence. And I had my voice. The woman at the front desk looked up as I entered and said, "Filing a civil complaint." I nodded and handed her the documents. She flipped through them and asked for my ID and a small filing fee. I paid it without blinking. That money was nothing compared to what it had cost me to stay in a motel for the last 5 days watching some stranger live in my home like she had earned it. I asked how long it might take. She said with a case like this, maybe 3 weeks before a hearing date. 3 more weeks. But I swallowed my frustration and nodded. That was the system. And if I was going to win this, I had to play it clean. Still, that didn't mean I had to sit around doing nothing. I spent the next week collecting more evidence. I met up again with Denise and got the voicemails and texts she had promised. Then I talked to 2 more people who had also had issues with Karen. One had been fined for painting his mailbox the wrong shade of blue even though the HOA had no official color guide. The other said Karen had repeatedly entered her backyard claiming she was checking for code violations. The woman caught her once snooping through her gardening shed. That was enough for me. I wrote it all down, created a timeline, printed photos, and even found a lawyer willing to give me advice pro bono. He said my case was strong. But he warned me. People like Karen. They don't go down easy. They smile, they lie, they spin stories. They make themselves the victim. He asked if I was ready for that. I said I was. I thought I was. But then the hearing day came. And I realized just how deep Karen was willing to go. I showed up to the small courtroom wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt. I had my folder, my notes, and everything organized. Lindsay arrived 20 minutes late wearing sunglasses and acting like she just stepped off a reality show set. She strutted in and gave me a smirk like she knew something I didn't. Karen was right behind her, wearing a crisp white blouse and pearls like she was hosting a charity brunch. She walked right up to me and said, "I hope you're ready to be embarrassed today." I didn't answer. I just stared at her. Because I knew the truth. And it was about to come out. The judge was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and no patience for games. She called the case. I was the plaintiff. Lindsay was the defendant. Karen wasn't even listed. But she had come to testify. When it was my turn, I laid it all out. I explained how I owned the cabin and showed the documents to prove it. I explained how I had left town and returned to find Lindsay living there without permission. I showed the photo she had posted online. I even played part of the voicemail where Karen told Denise, "Don't worry, it's just a little favor, he won't even know she's there." The judge listened quietly and took notes. Then it was Lindsay's turn. She flipped the whole thing. She said Karen had told her she had permission from me. That she was told I'd be gone all summer and wouldn't mind someone watching the place. She said she had been told I was a friend of Karen's. Which was a lie. She said I had stormed into the house screaming and threatening her. Another lie. I watched the judge's face. She wasn't buying it. Then Karen was called to the stand. And that's when things got twisted. She walked up and smiled at the judge. She said, "Your Honor, I've known the plaintiff's family for years. We lived in the same neighborhood for a long time." That part was true. She continued, "We had many conversations about his move to the mountains and he expressed concerns about safety during the off-season." Another lie. She said, "He told me once that if I ever needed to let someone use the place it would be fine as long as they were respectful." Lie after lie. She made it sound casual, harmless. She made herself look like someone just trying to help a friend. I was stunned. But I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. Because when she was done, I pulled out the message she had sent to someone else just 2 months ago. I found it on a community forum. She had written, "Can't believe that hermit finally moved out. Maybe I'll take my wine up there next time and make a weekend of it." I printed the post and showed the timestamp. Karen looked shaken for the first time. The judge stared at it for a long moment, then looked at Karen. "Did you write this?" Karen said, "It was a joke." The judge said, "It doesn't sound like a joke." Then I played the voicemail from Denise again. This time the judge asked, "Who is the person speaking?" I answered, "That's Karen." The judge turned back to her. She asked if she had previously placed other people in homes without permission. Karen started to stammer. She said, "That's irrelevant." But the judge disagreed. "It goes to intent," she said. She asked for a 10-minute recess. During the break, Lindsay tried to talk to Karen, but Karen walked away. She knew it was slipping. I stood by the vending machines, my heart pounding. I didn't know how it would go, but I knew I had done everything I could. When we returned, the judge was ready. She said, "Based on the documents and testimony, it is clear to this court that the plaintiff did not give permission for the defendant to reside in his home." She turned to Lindsay. "You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 72 hours. Then she looked at me. "You may pursue damages through a separate civil claim if desired." Karen tried to speak, but the judge cut her off. "You are not a party to this case." That was it. I had won. But I didn't feel relief yet. Because I knew Karen wasn't done. She had this look in her eyes as she left the courtroom. Cold, calculating. And as she passed me, she whispered, "This isn't over." And I believed her. Because Karen didn't lose quietly. She lost loudly. And if she couldn't win in court, she'd try something else. I just didn't know what. Not yet. 3 days after the court ruling, I was finally back in my cabin. The air felt cleaner than I remembered, like it had been waiting for me to come home. I stepped inside slowly. Every creak of the floorboards sounded louder than usual. The walls seemed to breathe with me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could maybe relax. But then I looked around. And it hit me. This wasn't the same cabin anymore. Lindsay had touched everything. The cushions were in different places. The books on the shelf were all out of order. My blankets were folded wrong. There were new mugs in the cupboard. There were shampoo bottles in the shower that weren't mine. Her scent still hung in the air. Like she had left a piece of herself behind just to remind me that she had been there. That she had slept in my bed. Cooked in my kitchen. Lived in my world. Uninvited. I stood in the middle of the living room and clenched my fists. I didn't even know where to begin. But I knew one thing. I needed to make this place mine again. So I started cleaning. Not just wiping surfaces. I tore through every room. I stripped the bed, burned the sheets, started a bonfire out back, and tossed in every scrap she might have touched. Her towel, her toothbrush, even her stupid wine glass. I watched the flames eat through them like it was chewing away the invasion. I aired out the place, opened every window, and let the wind scream through the cabin like a spirit clearing bad energy. I scrubbed the counters until my hands hurt. And then I sat down at the kitchen table and finally let the silence settle. But it didn't last long. That night something felt wrong. Again. I tried to sleep but couldn't. So I sat by the window listening to the forest. At first it was just the usual sounds. Owls calling in the distance. Leaves rustling. A raccoon knocking something over by the shed. But then there was a click. Not loud. Just enough to make me freeze. It came from the back door. I stood up slowly and reached for the flashlight beside the couch. I didn't turn it on yet. I waited. Another click. Then the faint sound of the doorknob turning. I moved quietly across the room, staying low, staying calm. I peeked through the curtain just as the door creaked open. And there she was. Karen. Standing in my doorway at midnight, holding something in her hand. I flipped the light on and shouted, "What the hell are you doing here?" She didn't flinch. She just stepped inside like she had every right to. I said, "Leave now or I'm calling the cops." She held up the object in her hand. A spare key. The one that had gone missing weeks ago. she said. Thought you might want this back. I stared at her. Why are you here, Karen? She walked further and ignoring me, looking around the place like she was doing an inspection. She said, you didn't have to make such a big deal out of this. Lindsay was harmless. I said, she was in my house. You gave away my home. Karen shrugged. You're lucky anyone wanted to stay in this dump. I stepped forward. Get out. No. She turned slowly. Her face calm but her eyes were wild. She said, you embarrassed me in court. You think that's the end of it. You have no idea what you started. I picked up my phone. I told her I was dialing the sheriff. She sneered. Go ahead. Tell them I broke in. Tell them I gave you back the key you dropped. Tell them I was checking on a friend who seemed emotionally unstable. She paused. I'll say I was worried about you. You seemed on edge in court. Unwell. She smiled. Let them come see what they think. I could barely breathe. I said, you need to leave now before I make you. She stepped back to the door and said, this place used to be peaceful before you showed up. You don't belong up here. People like you. You just make things ugly. Then she dropped the key on the floor, turned around, and left. I stood frozen for several minutes after the door closed, listening, waiting to hear if she was coming back. Eventually I locked every door, every window. I put a chair against the front entrance and slept with a baseball bat beside my bed. The next morning I went to the sheriff's office again. I told them what happened. They asked if she had threatened me. I said no. But she had entered uninvited. They said unless I had it on camera or unless she caused damage or harm, there wasn't much they could do, just like before. So I did what I had to do. I installed cameras, motion sensors, even an alarm system connected to a satellite signal. If Karen so much as breathed near my door again I would know. But that didn't fix the real problem. Karen was obsessed. Not with the cabin. With control. She couldn't stand that I had taken something away from her. That I had made her look small in court. So I knew she would keep coming. She'd find another angle, another way to mess with me. And I was right. Because 2 days later I got a letter. Not in the mail. Hand-delivered. No return address. Just tucked under my windshield. Said, I hope you enjoy the woods while you still can. The county has rules about septic systems. And noise complaints. And unauthorized modifications. Would be a shame if someone reported violations. I crumpled the letter in my fist. She was going to try the bureaucratic route. I was ready. I drove straight to the county office. I asked for every single code and ordinance related to private cabins. I read them all. Made a checklist. Checked my systems. Called an inspector myself. Everything was up to code. Then I left a message for Karen. I knew she still monitored the Ridgewood community forums. So I posted a short message. To whoever thinks I'm afraid of citations. I know the law. I'm not going anywhere. Come again and we'll let the authorities sort it out on camera next time. She never replied. But I know she saw it. Because that night the motion detector on the west side of my cabin went off. No one was there when I checked. But I knew she had come by. Just to let me know she could. So I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend my home anymore. I was going to expose Karen. Completely. Because I had a feeling. There was more to her than a few unauthorized guests and HOA bullying. I was starting to believe Karen had crossed lines before. Worse than what she did to me. And I was going to find out what she was hiding. Even if it meant going back to Ridgewood. It had been almost 2 weeks since Karen last showed up at my cabin. And I didn't trust the silence. It wasn't over. I could feel it. She hadn't backed off. She had just gone quiet. Karen didn't quit. She waited, watched, plotted. So I decided to do something she'd never expect. I went back. Back to Ridgewood. Back to the neighborhood I thought I had left behind forever. The moment I drove past the old metal sign that read "Welcome to Ridgewood Estates," I felt it. That old weight. That familiar suffocating tension that came from living under 1,000 unspoken rules enforced by one woman and her clipboard. I pulled onto my mother's old street and parked a block away from Karen's house. Looked the same. White siding, freshly painted flower beds trimmed within an inch of their lives, perfect little porch swing that probably hadn't been used once. I watched from the car for almost an hour. No movement. Then I saw her. Stepping out onto the porch like a queen surveying her land. She stood there with a glass of lemonade talking to one of the new neighbors. I recognized the look on their face. Polite but nervous. Karen was still in charge here. Still holding court. I didn't want her to see me, not yet. I had work to do. So I drove around the neighborhood, stopped at the local gas station, then at the diner by the corner where people still remembered my family name. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee. The waitress recognized me. She said, "Thought you moved up north for good." I said I had, but something brought me back. She leaned in and said, "Let me guess. Karen." I nodded. Her eyes narrowed. She said, "She's still up to her old tricks, you know. Still running the HOA like it's a private kingdom." I asked if she'd heard anything specific. She said, "A couple of months ago an older couple tried to repaint their shutters dark green. Karen said it clashed with community colors. Filed a complaint and had a contractor repaint them while they were out grocery shopping." I asked, "Without permission?" She nodded. Said they owed the HOA reimbursement for it. They refused. Now there's a lien on their house. My stomach turned. I asked if anyone had ever taken legal action against Karen directly. She said, "People tried. But Karen always had something on someone. She knew when people were behind on taxes. She knew who had a second mortgage. She knew who was cheating. Oh, no one knew. But if you crossed her, somehow word got out. Divorces happened. Jobs were lost. Deals fell through. It was like she had her own secret network. And no one ever saw her coming." I finished my coffee and left her a tip. Then I drove to the public records office. I asked to pull the last 5 years of HOA filings. I wanted to see every complaint, every fine, every legal dispute. They gave me access to digital copies. I sat down and started reading. It didn't take long to see the pattern. The names changed, but the method didn't. She'd start with a warning, then a fine, then an escalation that forced the homeowner to either comply or sell. There were 22 homes that had sold within 60 days of a major HOA citation. That wasn't normal. That was a purge. Then I looked deeper. Several of those homes had been bought by the same real estate agency, a small firm called Ridgeview Home Solutions. I didn't recognize the name. But when I looked up the company filing, Karen's husband was listed as one of the silent partners. There it was. The connection. Karen would push people out through HOA fines and restrictions. Then their homes would be bought through her husband's company, renovated, resold at a profit. That wasn't just unethical. That was illegal. I printed everything I could and took photos on my phone. I needed more. So I did the last thing I ever thought I would do. I knocked on Karen's door. She answered wearing the same pearl necklace from court. Her smile dropped the second she saw me. She said, "You have some nerve coming here." I said, "We need to talk." She stepped out and closed the door behind her. Her voice dropped. "What do you want?" I said, "You lied to a judge, you broke into my home, and now I find out you've been using your position to run people out and steal their properties." She laughed. "That's rich. You think you're some kind of detective." I said, "No. I'm just someone who doesn't like being stepped on." She got close and whispered, "You don't know what you're playing with. You think I'm the problem. This neighborhood is mine. These people need someone like me to keep things clean, organized, proper." I said, "You mean scared?" She said, "I mean protected. From people like you who move into cabins and think they're above the law." I held up the photos. I said, "The sheriff's office will want to see these." Karen looked me dead in the eye. "Do you really want to start a war with me? Because I will bury you in paperwork and rumor and complaints until you wish you never left your cabin." I said, "Good. Then we'll both be busy." I walked away. That night I emailed everything to a reporter at a local paper. Someone who had already written pieces about HOA abuse. Then I drove back to the cabin. But even then I knew this wasn't over. Karen had too many strings in too many places. But she had made a mistake. She thought no one would ever fight back. Now she had a real problem. Me. And what she didn't know yet was that I had one more card to play. Something I hadn't told her. Something no one knew. The cabin she gave away to her friend. The one she claimed was just a vacation spot. That cabin wasn't just mine. It used to belong to her father. And I knew something about his will she didn't want getting out. I was halfway up the mountain trail when I remembered the letter. Not the one Karen left under my windshield. This was older. It was tucked in a plastic envelope inside the cabin's attic. I had found it during my first week living there back when I was clearing out cobwebs and mice nests and forgotten Christmas boxes. It was written in blue ink by hand, dated almost 30 years ago. The signature at the bottom was faint, but I remembered the name. Arthur Dalton. I didn't think anything of it back then. Just a previous owner maybe, or a distant relative. But after everything that happened with Karen, after she broke into my cabin, after she sent her friend to live in my bed, after she tried to bury me in HOA drama, that name clicked. Because Karen's maiden name was Dalton. And Arthur was her father. It all came back to me fast. I ran back down the trail into the cabin and climbed into the attic. I tore through the boxes until I found the envelope. Inside was the letter and an old folded document. It was a notarized deed transfer. Arthur Dalton had transferred the cabin to a man named Walter Reed. But here's the twist. The letter was addressed to Karen. And in it her father wrote, "This place is not yours. You disrespected its history and ignored my wishes. I am leaving it to someone who values peace over power." That one line lit a fire in my mind. Karen had tried to get the cabin back after her father passed, but he had already given it away. And when she couldn't get it back legally, she found another way. She waited for the next owner to move on, then manipulated her friend into squatting here. She had always wanted this place. Not for the land, not for the quiet, but because she hated that her father left it to someone else. She needed to reclaim it in her twisted way, by making sure I could never feel safe in it. But now I had proof. I had her motive. And I had her father's words. The next morning I made copies of everything and drove back to town. I went straight to the same journalist I had emailed before. Her name was Meredith, and she worked for a small paper that had been running pieces about corruption and power abuse in mountain communities. She read the documents slowly, then looked at me and said, "Are you sure you're ready for what happens if this goes public?" I said, "Absolutely." Within days the story hit. The headline read, "Local HOA President Tied to Property Scheme and Family Deed Dispute." The article laid it all out. How Karen manipulated HOA authority. How she placed friends in homes she didn't own. How she tried to take back the cabin her father had explicitly taken from her in writing. It even included scanned images of the letter and deed. People ate it up. The comment sections exploded. Residents from Ridgewood started sharing their own stories. Some spoke anonymously, some publicly. Karen's name was everywhere. And then the real fallout began. She was called into an emergency HOA meeting. People were demanding answers. Some demanded she resign, others wanted legal action. Then her husband's real estate company started getting calls. People wanted to know how many properties were acquired after HOA fines. How many times Karen's fingerprints were involved. Within a week, Ridgeview Home Solutions froze operations pending investigation. Karen tried to fight back. She claimed the letter was fake. She claimed the story was slander. But the document was real. It had a notary stamp that matched county records. There was no denying it. She had been cut out of the inheritance. And she had snapped. A few days later I got another visit. This time from the sheriff himself. He asked if I was willing to give a full statement. I said yes. Then he said, "You might want to know something. Karen's friend Lindsay." She confessed. Turns out Karen had promised her a cut of future property sales. If she stayed in my cabin long enough to claim squatters' rights. It was all a setup. Karen wanted me out so she could take the place. Resell it through her husband's firm and pretend she was never involved. But I ruined the plan when I came back early. The sheriff said charges were being filed. Civil and criminal. Theft of property, manipulation of public records, conspiracy, and more. It was happening. For real. Karen was finally facing consequences. And the best part, I didn't have to lift another finger. The town took care of it. The people she bullied for years had waited long enough. Now they had a target. A leader to remove. I stayed quiet for a while after that. Didn't post, didn't comment, didn't stir anything. I just went back to living. Fixing the porch. Replacing the bed. Replanting my garden. Day by day I reclaimed the space. Made it mine again. No more unexpected guests. No more late night threats. Just the wind and the trees and the sound of peace. It took another month before I finally sat on my porch and didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder. And then one morning, a car pulled up. I tensed for a second. But it wasn't Karen. It was an older man wearing a brown jacket and holding a folder. He said his name was Paul. He used to work with Arthur Dalton. He had read the article. He had something for me. It was a handwritten map. Drawn by Arthur years ago. It showed hiking trails, old hunting spots, and a tiny marked clearing way past the northern ridge. Arthur called it the heart of the mountain. Paul said. He always wanted someone who appreciated quiet to find it. I thanked him. And that afternoon I hiked to the spot. Took hours. But when I found it, I knew. It was perfect. A small flat area surrounded by pines with a single stump in the center. I sat down on it. And for the first time since everything started, I felt still. Karen was gone. Her grip broken. Her secrets exposed. And me. I had a home again. One no one could take from me. Because I fought. Because I didn't let fear or rules or bullies win. Because sometimes peace doesn't come easy. Sometimes you have to burn down the lies just to see the stars again. So I sat there until the sun went down. No noise. No people. Just the wind whispering through the trees. And finally, silence that felt like mine. The end. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to like the video. Leave a comment and tell us your favorite moment. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories just like this. New episodes are coming soon. See you in the next one.